for this moment to discuss a very, very important matter. My name is Roland Jackson, and I am here today in my capacity as a member of the Baton Rouge Foundation. In that capacity, I serve as the chairperson of a current community-wide effort that is focused on educating the community as to some of the challenges that we face in our community in appropriately serving our community members who are impacted with mental illness. I want to start by very briefly telling you about Curtis. Curtis grew up 3 blocks from me in the Eden Park neighborhood where I grew up. Curtis was a grade ahead of me in school, and so for blocks of time, all of elementary school, Curtis and I were together. He left a year before me. We spent a couple of years together in middle school and then in high school. I would later in life be elected to the legislature, and Curtis still lived around the corner from where my district office was. I was able to help Curtis to secure a stand in the state capitol to shine shoes where he made money, and Curtis was a part of my life that I remembered from my childhood. Curtis was diagnosed with a mental illness, and the great challenge was getting Curtis to take his medicine. The difference between Curtis when he took his medicine and Curtis when he did not was night and day. And we would always, Curtis would come into the office and we would talk, or I'd see him at the Capitol and I'd challenge him about his medication. And whenever he was on his medication, things were wrong. Well, late one evening, it was a Thursday night, Friday morning, I got a phone call saying to me that Curtis had been killed. Curtis had been deteriorating for a number of days because he had not taken his medicine, and Curtis walked upon the wrong group of young people who did not know Curtis, did not understand his behavior. He became involved in an altercation that ultimately cost him his life. And so when I speak about this issue, when I give myself to this issue, it is not simply out of some philosophy or some set of positions, but rather it is because I know firsthand the realities of families that are impacted by people with mental illness. And one of the unfortunate realities in our community is that we have not adequately provided an infrastructure to serve people with mental illness in our community. And so as a consequence, 2 of the greatest entry points for services for people with mental illness in our community end up being emergency rooms and jail cells. It is a statistic that nationwide there are more people diagnosed with mental illness who are located in jails than there are in treatment services around our country. And so the issue of the criminalization of mental illness is a critical issue in our community. One, that there are a number of citizens, and I'm thankful that Dr. Clark is among those who are meeting to discuss what type of infrastructure needs to be in place to begin to address the issues so that people with mental illness don't end up unnecessarily in emergency rooms, or worse than that, end up in an emergency room and dispatched to nothingness. And so as we encounter people, as emergency rooms become unnecessary portals, how do we make certain that people have pathways to meaningful supports, services, and access to medication? In addition to that, how do we equip our law enforcement to recognize mental illness as opposed to antisocial behavior or criminal behavior? And how do we make certain that they have this
down there? And I think Earl Kane ended up staying a couple of weeks and got the help he needed for his problem. But I tell you that story because one of the many things that the coroner does is what's called an order of protective custody. And essentially what that is if anybody in our community is a witness to someone's behavior, where their behavior is a danger to themselves or a danger to others, then they can come into my office and swear an affidavit that this person is in danger, and then my office will go pick them up. Basically, it's the ability for us to get somebody in the community involuntarily from where they're at in front of a physician for an evaluation. Okay, and that's how the OPC works. Typically, when we pick these folks up, we take them and put them in front of a physician in an emergency department. And then that way, now you have a doctor and a patient that can then have an interaction, and then the doctor can determine if the person is endangering themselves or they need help. If that is the case, then essentially the next step in the process is if the person needs to be involuntarily admitted to the hospital, the physician will fill out something called a Physician's Emergency Certificate, or PEC. Now, a PEC basically is a document that's taking someone's civil liberties away and putting them in a hospital to protect them and the community to get them the help they need. And in America, that's a pretty big deal to take somebody's civil rights away. So in order to have a checks and balances system, once that PEC is instituted, within 72 hours, you have to have an independent physician come in and give a second opinion as to the confinement of that person. So the legislature said, well, I wonder who that second opinion person can be. Who can be that other doctor? They said, well, we got these guys named coroners, and they're all 64 parishes have one. Why don't we make that the second opinion? So the role of the coroner then becomes to do what's called a CEC, or Coroner's Emergency Certificate, and that allows for the confinement of these people. We roughly do about 1,000 OPCs a year and 6,000 CECs. So when a lot of people talk about the role of the coroner in the community, and think about our role in death investigation, remember I told you that's only 3,000 cases a year. We actually do almost over twice as much mental health work as we do work in the death investigation arena. So that's why I'm so passionate about mental health, getting the people the help they need. I don't think prison is the right place to send somebody if they have mental health problems. They need to certainly be getting treatment by a physician. So, and I'm sure later in the question and answer, we're going to dive in a little bit more to what's going on right now with some of the suggestions that maybe you've heard me or my colleagues say. What does the future look like for our parish? So, appreciate the opportunity to talk, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. I'm glad you brought up the question and answer period, because I want to point out that you do have some index cards and pens on the table. And later when we get to that point, if you have questions for the panelists as we go through, please go ahead and write those down so that we'll be ready for that. And our next speaker is also a professional in the field of mental health care and has been pretty much a career at the Capital Area Human Services District, and that is Stephen McInnes.
Always doesn't carry a real time cost. I hope I can get help. I've been with mental health for 25 years. Fresh out of school, started, worked 20 years in the children's behavioral health services, recently moved as manager of Baton Rouge Mental Health, and now I'm the clinical service director of all of Capital Area pertaining to the mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse clinics. We're starting off as far as telling stories, and it was a few years ago where mental health hit home. I come out of New Orleans, out of Jesuit High School there, graduated with a very good friend of mine who was a twin. This young man went on to become a neurosurgeon, and I got a call a couple of years ago from his brother saying he just committed suicide. Married, several kids, has lots of money, but depression was so bad he killed himself. And I point that out for the reason that a lot of people have stigmas pertaining to mental health and behavioral health and thinking that it does not affect them or it does not affect our community. However, mental illness doesn't care what color you are, it doesn't care how old you are, it doesn't care whether you're male or female, it doesn't care whether you're a multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire, it doesn't care if you're the governor, it doesn't care if you're the guy who's walked out of a hurricane, it doesn't care who you are. I used to do a group at Baton Rouge General, did some moonlighting there, and I would go up on their adult psychiatric unit, and I would ask them questions. So I have these patients on a psychiatric unit, and I ask them, how many of y'all know somebody with diabetes? Majority of them raise their hand. How many of y'all know somebody that has heart problems? Raise their hand. Then I would ask them, how many of y'all know if those people ever knelt down and said, dear God, let me have diabetes. Dear God, let me have this. I wish I could wake up tomorrow morning and have a heart attack. one of the clients said, "Steve, something's wrong with you." And I laughed, I said, "No." And I said, "Now, those people have those illnesses. They didn't do anything to have those illnesses, but it's their responsibility to take care of them." And I was doing that to designate a point to them, and that is a lot of them thought it was their fault they had mental illness. And it's not. A lot of it's genetics, environment, combination. There are different theories pertaining to that. What we're finding out as we advance forward towards medicine is that there's a lot of genetics that go along with why people have mental illness. We work in the study towards that and try to educate the community as much as possible. And hopefully that's what this forum does. Our community over the last 25 years, from my experience looking on, has changed drastically with our view of mental illness. Way back it was more of a taboo. It's not much taboo now. We know more about it. However, we're not necessarily doing more. When I first started, you had multiple psychiatric hospitals in Baton Rouge. You have two. You have a few now as far as multiple. As far as kids go, we dropped down from having 6 to only one that takes children above the age of 12. So if you have a kid that comes into the mental health system that's under the age of 12 and they have to be hospitalized, they have to go to New Orleans, they have to go to Shreveport, they have to go to Alexandria, Lafayette. And so we're sending people away and families can't reach them and touch them. Capital area is, we cover a large region. We cover 7 different parishes. We cover mental health, we cover addiction services, we cover co-occurring. Co-occurring is something huge. There are a lot of people who have mental illness and co-occurring, and they say that there's a new diagnosis of substance abuse of some sort. And a lot of people don't treat one and not the other. We're working much closer to bring that together, where you can't just treat one by itself. You have to treat it. Our services offer that to the mental disabilities. We're trying to reach people as early as possible. We're in 33 different schools, we're in 7 parishes that are there. We set up when they went through deinstitutionalization. They closed, put a lot of people out of the state hospitals, promising that there would be a place for them to go, and there wasn't. And so they're walking around and they create more homelessness. Increase as far as people in the jail system has gone up. Hospital rates as far as emergency rooms have gone up. Dr. Clark pointed out that OPCs have gone up. I was asked to go into East Baton Rouge Parish Prison and watch a graduation not too long ago on the women's side. I walked in there, I'm sitting in there, and as I'm sitting, I'm looking across the inmates who are there, and I'm going, I know that lady that used to treat her kid. I know that lady that used to treat her sister. I know that lady that used to treat her when she was a kid. And I'm thinking to myself, these people do not belong in jail. The reason they're there, our community didn't do what we were supposed to in order to catch them, to prevent them from going there. And I'm hoping that the discussion, I really appreciate being invited, opens that up to where we can do things that educate the public so that we don't have to fill in our jails. We don't have to have emergency rooms closed for various reasons, and we're able to help people out.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And our next speaker is from the Veterans Administration. All of you should know that we have a very high military participation in this state, and so consequently we have a large number of veterans as well. And often these days they return from multiple tours with multiple issues related to the mental stress of that. And so we welcome April Plaisance from the VA.
Or April Foreman. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. I'm new to Louisiana, and I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here. But before I do that, I'm going to start with the statistic that you actually know because you've heard it on the news all the time because it makes the news, and it's true. 22 veterans die by suicide every day. You know this because you've heard it. I know this. But let me tell you some things you don't know. Of those 22 veterans, 5 of them are in VA care, and 17 of them have never walked through my door. 17 veterans die every day in our American communities, and the VA's not ever seen them. We depend on you. So if if we want to treat the mental health needs of our veterans, we need stronger community mental health systems. We just need them. It's not debatable. Let me tell you how I got here. It was just about 5 years ago. I was working as the only psychologist in the fourth sickest and poorest counties of rural Kansas, which is basically where I'm from. My people have been farmers and mechanics for, well, almost as long as they've had farms and certainly as long as they've had cars. And they've never been many places. They live in small communities where everybody knows each other, right? And that's where I was practicing, serving patients, primarily who have borderline personality disorders. If you don't know what that disorder is, it's a very serious personality disorder, causes lots of chaotic behavior. These folks who have very severe versions of this sort of become legendary members of our communities, right? Everybody knows them. Law enforcement knows them. Everybody knows them. That's my favorite person to help. Let me tell you a little statistic. If you have borderline personality disorder and you get effective treatment, 8 out of 10 folks who have it will be better in a year, much better. And by the way, this is like 20 to 30% of your folks with mental illness in your communities. That's a little bit higher if you're treating veteran populations. And out of those 10, while 8 out of 10 will get better, 1 out of 10 will die by suicide. If you walked into your doctor's office and he diagnosed you with a condition that would kill you 10% of the time, you take it very seriously, correct? And suicide is in fact a pretty big deal. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It's a little bit higher for veterans. It is a major public health issue. It is the #1 mental health emergency. And we get very little funding and we get very little resources to help people and keep them alive long enough to solve their problems. I was working in rural Kansas treating these folks, and guess what? If you do the right thing, your patients absolutely get better. They recover. They live productive lives in their community if you do what you're supposed to do. Getting funding to do that's really hard. They were paying me basically a poverty level wage. I was seeing their hardest patients, and then something happened in Kansas that was very painful for me, which is why I'm here today. They began to disintegrate the community mental health services across the state. It became harder and harder for me to get what my patients needed to help them get well. And so there were all more forms to fill out. It was harder. And finally they took a patient that we had done everything for, which showed tremendous improvement, that on her medical mental health bills alone, I'd saved my salary in 1 year 3 times over. Just that one patient, done such a good job. And they denied her the care she needed, which was just one group therapy and one individual appointment a week, right, to keep her secure and stable in the community versus the multiple appointments she was getting every day and all the crisis services. I'd saved so much money, I could demonstrate it. I called in to get this exemption overturned, to get her therapy approved. And a woman on the phone that perhaps I'm not fond of in this moment said to me, Dr. Foreman, with such imperiousness, the gravy train is over. As if there is a gravy train in mental health. And let me tell you, there is not. I knew immediately, because I knew how the changes were going in the community, that I was going to have to find a new job where I would be empowered to provide high quality care to people who really needed it, and that this was going to get harder and harder. And I embarked on a fairly significant job search. And I got recruited to be here special because I was absolutely promised that our government would absolutely commit the resources to taking care of veterans' mental health needs. And I'm going to tell you, in your community, that is absolutely the case. I am here today talking to you because my mission is to serve people in severe and sometimes lethal emotional pain, one person, one problem, 1 minute at a time if I have to, and to be more effective than that if I can. I do that by helping veterans at risk of suicide. I work at a clinic in your community, but of the 22 folks, veterans who die a day, 17 of them aren't going to come to me unless I talk to you. And I need help. They depend on a strong community mental health network in order to be safe. And I look forward to talking to you today.
That's a pretty powerful statistic. Appreciate you sharing that. Well, I think that brings us to question and answer. So if you have some questions for our panelists who all have been just wonderful, we will entertain those. And I see you have a question.
When an individual is arrested in East Baton Rouge Parish and brought to our jail, is an assessment done by a mental health professional or physician to determine whether or not they have a mental health issue?
I am not 100% positive to the answer to the question. I do know that there's an assessment in the booking area for medical needs, but I don't know that it's specific for medical and psychiatric needs. The point of impact, though, I think, in the overall scheme is to prevent them from getting to the jail, especially if they do already have a mental illness problem. And law enforcement officers have the option, they have the ability when they make a contact with the person is to say, where's the appropriate place to bring this person? Did they commit a crime that they need to go to jail for? Obviously, we're set up for that. Or is the better thing is that they potentially have a mental health problem, or they have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and the more appropriate place is an area, and currently in our system it's the emergency department, but an area where they can be treated for their mental health problem, not necessarily the crime that's committed. And it certainly, it all depends on what the crime was too, right? I mean, I guess if they robbed a bank, then whether they have mental illness or not, they still robbed the bank, so you have to go through the judicial system in that fashion.
Can I ask a secondary
Yeah.
question about once they're in jail and they are waiting for their trial or whatever the situation is, do we have mental health professionals that go to the jail home and that actually meet with these individuals to assess them?
They do. They have a full-time, not full-time, they have a psychiatrist on contract who is evaluating these folks, as well as I believe they have a social worker, and they recently had a second social worker that was part-time to try to manage that. The problem is the volume is so tremendous in the jail, the people that need this type of help, that it can't really be managed by one or two or three people. The other issue, and I would, just kind of make it is plain so we can think about it. You wouldn't come here to Drusilla Seafood to have your tires changed in your car, right? So why would you go to jail to get your health care taken care of? It doesn't make any sense whether we're talking about high blood pressure or mental health. That's not in the right place. It's about putting people where they can get what they need for what the problem entails. Is that help?
Do we have other panelists that would like to address that?
So let's talk a little bit about what it takes to provide mental health care in jail versus the community. Now, I don't have the exact statistics for your community, but I bet you are right focused on kill this. But if you are paying for someone's mental health care in jail, that means you're paying for their lodging, you're paying for their food, that means you're paying for their lawyers, you're paying for their court date, you can absolutely pay for a whole bunch of things. Or you can pay someone, like me, to provide that same service in the community at a much reduced cost with fewer contacts in the environment that they actually have to live in and get better in. If you want to pay for mental health services in jail, which is currently what goes on the majority of the time, that's fine. I'll go there. If you pay me to go there, I'll treat people where you pay me to treat them. But the paycheck for that's going to be higher. Now, if you have pretty big pocketbooks, and as a community you can write that check, I say do that. It's expensive. It's not the most effective thing to do. And if you have limited funds, your dollar is best spent keeping them out of jail and treating them in the community where they live. It is really important. That is also where people get better. And I'm going to say that just really strongly because I do serve people who sometimes have problems with the legal system and are in and out. But I can tell you it's not that they go to jail, have a wonderful mental health treatment experience, and come out and are well. They usually go, and then we've got to start on their care 2 steps back. And so it's harder, the treatment outcomes are not as good, and you as a community write a check for that. If you have the money, I'll go and treat people where I'm asked to go. But I'm going to tell you, if you are planning as a community, this is not your best option.
The students don't have something to say about this too.
And so I think that it is important to know that this whole notion of people and ending up in jail, in many instances, because the behavior that they are demonstrating is directly related to their mental illness. And so you end up incarcerating people because of their mental illness.
Yes.
And as Dr. Clark made reference to, you then put them in an environment where the staff that is intended to support them is gravely overburdened in terms of the number of people that they are to serve. And as Dr. Foreman pointed out, they are then released into nothingness upon their release. And so there's not a system or a structure that is able to support people comprehensively. That is the conversation that Dr. Clark has been taking part in, the one that I have been trying to lead in our community. And it is that there must be a system that recognizes the needs of people with mental illness. And so how do we put a preventive mechanism on the front end? How do we assess people in the same way, whether they're in an emergency room or going into a correctional facility? How do we collect the same information, understand the needs of people, and have a system in place that can effectively divert those people who are better served in a treatment scenario rather than being incarcerated or in an emergency room? But that doesn't just happen. You have to understand what are the components of the system that exist in your community, what are the resources that are available, where are the gaps, and then what are we willing to do as a community to fill those gaps so that people who have the ability can be contributing well members of their society, which almost everyone with a mental health diagnosis can be.
The answer to the original question.
As far as the jail system goes, you're talking East Baton Rouge Parish, you're also talking Department of Corrections. You've got different jail systems that run around Louisiana. With East Baton Rouge Parish, there is only one social worker, like Dr. Clark said, to cover all of that. We did have a secondary part-time social worker that we were sending over there. We're waiting for another contract, we'll hopefully send now a full-time. And one of the purposes that we would send over there is so that when they would come out, we could connect them to the mental health centers and hopefully prevent them going back into the system there. DOC, we've got a contract coming up where we're trying to do the same thing when they come out of Department of Corrections, where we can monitor them. In the process of doing that, this is all a preventative thing. What can we do to keep people from going into the jail system? We train law enforcement. We have a crisis intervention team. Training is a 40-hour-a-week training where we've trained over 326 officers from various different facilities as far as East Baton Rouge Parish, the Sheriff's Office, Constable's Office, Southern, LSU. They come from other parishes now to us where we can train them. There's an 8-hour training course that we do for Louisiana State Probation and Parole and also Baton Rouge Police Academy. That's part of their training. So that the officers that are interacting with people with mental illness, when they get called, hopefully it's a CIT officer that takes the lead and can recognize what's going on, can approach these people who could be disturbed at that time appropriately where they may not end up in jail. Can you imagine if you have a mental illness, you're depressed, you're overly anxious, you're psychotic, and you end up in the jail system because we don't have the resources of what that does to you? I told you when I went over to EBR, I looked around and I saw people's moms, sisters, and daughters who were in there. What I didn't say is what their faces looked like. And some of them were absolutely terrified looking around them. And some of them were looking in complete despair when they would recognize somebody who saw them and going, you helped me before. Can you help me in this situation? Can I not be here? Is there help for me? What's going on? And so what we're trying to do is create continuums of care where people don't end up in those facilities. Or if they do end up there, and what the people said is the cost is astronomical. It's if you're paid to have to go behind bars to treat somebody, it's going to cost money versus having somebody be able to go to their home and be able to do different things to prevent them from going, prevent them from having to be behind bars, and the safety issues. So I hope that answers.
I want to point out that all of our speakers have talked about the importance of keeping people within the community where they have their own support systems. I personally know one young adult who had to go to Allen Parish for treatment of bipolar disorder, and another who went to Aggieville for a substance abuse problem, both people from Baton Rouge, where you think we would have plenty of services, but it depends upon which beds are open at what time or whatever we're dealing with. Another question?
I just have a comment, and I believe in preventative measures. I know that clients do work well in their environment, but I also know that clients are sometimes non-compliant with their treatment and medication. And that's one of the biggest problems that we see. My dream would be to have a team that could go out and be a mobile team and to be able to monitor these people and ensure that they take their medications. Because when they're on the medications, they do well. And they are able to be compliant and be able to be a productive citizen in the community. That's one of the biggest problems that I see.
I'd like to comment on this. Let's talk a little bit about non-adherence, because this is exactly my population. So folks with high risk of suicide tend to have high levels of treatment non-adherence. As a matter of fact, most of us know, and if you look at the balance sheets for the cost of mental health care, you have probably 5 to 20%, and it's probably closer to the 5% of those patients on your rosters for what things cost, who count for about 80% of your mental health costs. And non-adherence to their medications and to behavioral therapy are a huge reason why those costs are so high. When you come up against issues of non-adherence, you have a couple of options, and this is my specialty, and I work with this with folks at very high risk all the time. So I do this in the trenches every day, and then I got to talk with Ross and Carter in October at the Carter Symposium about naturally what we should do, and have I got a deal for you. There are a couple of options. The first option is that you have to have focus on that 80%, that 80% of your cost, or that 5% of your patients. You have to treat them differently. You don't put them in the mental health system the way you put everybody else in. You identify who your super utilizers are. And the second thing is, of course, that then you have teams who are really gifted at helping people with treatment non-adherence. If you blame people for not getting better, you say it's your fault that you're not getting better. If you went to your doctor with a cold and you had a respiratory infection and you tried a treatment and it didn't work, would the doctor blame you? Patients cannot fail their mental health treatment. Their mental health treatment can fail them, and that is very important. I do clinics specifically for folks who've been failed by many kinds of treatment. We say your disorder is more complex and we treat them differently. The second option is something that's more innovative. So on my bio, I talk about mental health system design, and this is not here yet for everyone, but there are all sorts of wonderful technology tools that have been proven to have, and the studies on this are phenomenal. I've done this with high-risk, non-adherent patients. It works really well. That help people become adherent with monitoring their mood or monitoring their symptoms, with taking their medication, that are very, very, very inexpensive. So you're talking maybe like literally $2, $3 a week. That's like cheap. For your folks who are super utilizers. What that would require would be really empowering and supporting your community mental health center to get grants to implement things like that. And it would require really empowering or paying or programming in your mental health community to identify the super utilizers and treat them differently. So when I'm talking about how I was just trying to get one group and the one individual appointment with that one patient, what you didn't know, what I did not say, was she was one of the top 10 most expensive mental health patients in the state of Kansas. And we had dramatically reduced her costs, and they were still on me. You've got to fight those political battles, because there are wonderful people in your community mental health system that will absolutely do this the minute that you give them the support to do it.
All I would add is that, so I sit on the committee of the group of people that Reverend Jessen has put together to kind of create a blueprint of what it would look like in East Bedford Parish. Mobile teams are part of it.
You notice Dr. Foreman mentioned political pressure too. Remember, part of the mission of this organization is informing voters, but then the voters have to do something with that information, and that you have to put the pressure on the people you elect to represent you. And I think we have a question over here.
I do know that Capital Area supports the idea of peer support and that it is a growing option. However, there isn't a lot of funding for people to be paid, and I'm wondering if it's being considered, particularly in the when someone is being considered evaluated for a to be admitted. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with the process here. As a matter of fact, Louisiana is the only state that has a system, for committing people. So it's just different. It's not bad. It's just different. So I got familiar with it because I was with some peers and they had mentioned how great people were. going through that process. So I would just hope that when this is being addressed, that peer support is within it, and that it be considered at every level, including, in the jails. Thank you.
I just want to share with you that the whole notion of peer support is a fundamental part of the process that is being envisioned. We recently traveled to San Antonio to look at their model and so on work. And the peer support was a vital ingredient in both the services for people with mental illness, but also those with substance abuse issues. And there was a heavy.
Well, I think what you're talking about is kind of how do you leverage your money, right? So, putting them in jail costs money, right? All the things that are involved with that. Having them inpatient in an acute psychiatric unit is expensive, like you just alluded to. But if you can create a system where maybe not everybody ends up in the expensive acute care psychiatric unit and they're able to be treated by a mobile team, or they're able to have peer-to-peer, these things are cheaper alternatives to certain patients, and you may prevent their crisis or their acute crisis. So if you have a center that's able to kind of take the person and triage them and place them in the appropriate spot, then you start to curb the cost in that scenario.
I want to talk about money. I love to talk about money. Because once I figured out that where the money comes from depends on what I'm allowed to do for patients, I became very interested in money. Now, before I started working with Kansas, had an academic career, and I used to just get to dream up ways to treat patients and say what the best thing was to do, and I didn't have to be practical at all until I was getting paid nothing and treating patients on prayers and rainbows. But let me tell you something. There are money that comes from lots of pots. There's money that comes from federal dollars, there's money that comes from state dollars, there's money that comes from parish dollars, right? You have money that comes from lots of pots. I live at Baton Rouge now, so I'm just saying, I live in Baton Rouge. So right now, if you had a choice, where would you like for the money to come from? From Baton Rouge dollars, state dollars, or federal dollars? You'd like to get some of that federal money, right? Because you would like to take advantage of that. Now, I am not here to make any political recommendations because I have no dog in this fight. I love you all, and I will be on the team of anybody who helps me get resources for the people I treat and care about. So I want to be super clear about that. If you look for pots of money by adjusting the things that you vote for, and the things you ask for your representatives to vote for, so to qualify for more federal dollars to do more programming, you definitely benefit. If you help support things like parity and mental health billing, so if mental health gets reimbursed at the same rate as other medical interventions, you get more mental health dollars, right, which helps him out. If you, so for example, on Tuesday, I was so lucky. I was in New Orleans. I was in Jackson Barracks. You probably don't know who she is, but she's super fancy. It's Rear Admiral Joan Hunter, and she was coming. The Rear Admiral Hunter was down to talk about how we could provide better mental health care services for folks in the National Guard in the state of Louisiana. Okay. Excellent point, because a whole bunch of those folks are not eligible for VA care, and they absolutely rely on your community to come up with a way to help them. Well, there are federal dollars that you can get through various healthcare and political wranglings, various healthcare dollars, various federal programs. She mentioned some huge pot of money, and she says, I'm coming to Baton Rouge on Wednesday. I'm going to meet with folks the state, and I'm going to really advocate that they go after those dollars and make sure those dollars go to strengthen the community mental health infrastructure where our National Guard might enter care, especially folks who are non-VA. Well, that's community mental health. That's y'all, right? Well, so you want to go after those dollars. You want to really strongly advocate for anything that prevents the most expensive care. And you ought to, these folks are great at numbers. That's what I've learned. So they can tell you, when I send someone to jail, it costs this, but if I keep them in the community, it costs this. They can tell you how many, right? Now I'm putting you on the spot. I'm a terrible person. But I can tell you, I know for my patients, I run cost analysis on my patients, and I know exactly how expensive their care is, and one of my goals is to get them more stable with the best outcomes possible and reduce their costs, and I did that with every patient. You can absolutely request that. And you can say, if we're going to cut, for example, the end here, right? So my veterans often end up in crisis beds before they get to me because I don't have a hospital. So they were using OK Long before OK Long closed down. Well, if they go to OK Long and their family can see them and it costs money this much for a bed, but then we don't have a bed, then the community's got to transport them elsewhere, right? And that's super expensive. And then you say, well, now we don't have those beds, so we're sending them pretty far away. And sure, that's a bad outcome and it's bad for the family. And believe me, the veterans really complain to me that they get transferred. And I say to the veterans, vote for people who make sure the beds are local then. That's what I tell them. I tell them to talk to y'all. I'm not powerful enough, right? So you say, well, it costs us this much to send them there, or we can open the inn here and it costs us this much. And we need to be really expert as a community about sending out messages about what the cost differences are. Because it turns out that the better care is usually less expensive.
I have a sort of a twofold question. First part of this question is that when the state and the legislators that we have here, along with the government, when you do have money coming from the federal government, the state don't want to accept it. Some people in the state don't want to accept federal
And
money.
you know, I'm just going to stay so sweetly clear of that.
Okay, yeah, all right. Okay, so you got a problem there. Accepting federal dollars, because we got some federal dollars could come to Louisiana right now, but the government won't accept it. Well, it's not here, I'll put it that way. Now, the second part of my question is, that's just a simple part. We have to work on that in the next 4 years. But the thing about it, what I want to know now, I know this Dr. Clark just asked for some more assistance in his office. I think he got it. I don't know if he got the money for it yet or not. But between all four of you all up there now, all of y'all got your work to do. Is there any way that you all can recommend to the others, if you're doing something that's not working right, that you can check with Reverend Jensen, or you can check with Dr. Clark, or you can check with Dr. Steve, or you can check with you, that if you can't do it, maybe somebody else can do it. If not, the four of y'all should have some other alternative that you can go to and have some of this service done. That's the question I'd like to know.
Since I have been so richly blessed to be at a place in life where I can feel free to say what I think, I believe that it is an absolute travesty in our state that healthcare decisions that impact, in many instances, the folks who need it most in our state have been sacrificed for political ambitions. I think it's a travesty, and I believe that as a state we can do better. We can do better. And so I think that that's an important part of it. Let me be very clear about my role in all of this. When it comes to providing services to people with mental illness, I am the only unqualified person on this panel. That's not what I do. My role here has been to begin a series of conversations in our community to say, guys, we have a problem. We have a problem in our community, and as a community, I believe we can do better. It begins with the conversations that Dr. Clark has been participating in, along being led by Dr. Kosofsky and others, that starts with the premise of what do we have here? What's in our system? What's available for people? And how do we make that work better together? How do we maximize the use of the dollars and services that we do already have in place? How do we replicate and build upon the work of the M in providing services, crisis services, and a portal for people who are in crisis in our communities? How do we rebuild a better version and connect with community resources to support people? And once we are clear on what we have and how we've done the best job with the dollars that we have, then I believe it's important that we say to our community, here's what we have, here's what we need, here is the gap, now what are we willing to do as a community to address that? And that's my role. The sooner I can get out of the way so that these people can do what they do in a better system, the better off we'll all be.
Before you ask your
question, I would say two things about those federal dollars that we turned down. And I would ask you, you heard about political action, don't be silent. Talk to your neighbors, talk to the people you go to church with, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Make sure they know the real facts. But those dollars that we keep turning down, they would benefit working people, not people who are sitting at home receiving assistance now. They're people that cobble together 1, 2, 3 minimum wage jobs and are poor enough for the assistance that's available, but not well off enough to buy through the exchanges. They would benefit 250,000 working people in this state who get up and go to work every day. The second thing I would say is there's no such thing as a federal dollar. Not $1 that Washington has came from Washington. It all came from a state. Okay, so we're giving our money away to other states. And forgive me for that. Another question.
Can I speak just a little bit about that real quick? So let me talk about my National Guard really quick, because I love my National Guard. I love the Louisiana National Guard, and I make it a point to be their friend. Most of my folks who are in National Guard that I might try to help in a crisis who don't qualify for VA benefits, and that's a whole thing, and that's complicated. It's for another day. But most of them are working multiple jobs. They're really, really super hardworking. They're often young guys and gals with young families just trying to make it. And they don't qualify for anything. It is for very few things. And getting sliding scale fee services that they can afford is really, really challenging. And if you did anything to improve that, you would directly help people in the National Guard.
I've listened to the presentation, but then I look back at the newspaper, I read the newspaper, and I see so many young people who get into all kinds of problems, of trouble. And I know it's like what you were talking about. It's too big to get your hands around. But I've had the experience of working with a child who had this bipolar. And parents was ready to do this or that or send them to this institution for help and this. It really begins at home, that the children need love, protection, and study their own child. And I work with children in the classroom, and I've had to take some of them aside to try to give them an extra pat. This they don't receive at home nor in school. Our schools are so geared up that the teacher don't have time to prepare for grouping her children so that you can give extra time to children with problems. And is there any place here in Baton Rouge who will consider, or is it in existence, that a parent could carry their child? This child is acting up, or some people say just bad, and a lot of times it's attention. And too many young people are winding up in the system as committing all kinds of crimes, on drugs and all of this, that, and the other. So is there any way is there a place where they could carry their child and have that child evaluated and be told that it's bipolar? Because you go to doctors, they don't tell you this right off unless you spend. John,
Okay, we have a full-service outpatient children's mental health clinic that we have a walk-in policy where they can walk in every morning and they can be seen and they can be evaluated. We have licensed clinical social workers. We also have psychiatrists that are there also. So we evaluate. That's how I ended up starting out, is working with children and adolescents. And so that population is very near and dear to me. The same as any other population as far as mentally ill. You're hearing people up here talking, and what you can hear is that we're not here about the dollars and stuff. We're here because we're very passionate about the people that we serve. We care about this population. I don't think we can maintain longevity with the population that we serve unless you really care about it. And so a lot of it does start with the kids, and we do have, I think the youngest bipolar child I've ever seen was 4 years old, where we were able to look at, diagnose, and go from there. our agency, we're in 33 different schools, East Baton Rouge and some of the other parishes, and so we are going into the schools as much as we can to reach out to them. Some of the problems has to do is that it's to find the funding. Some of it also has to do is to find the labor force to be able to do this. You can't find a labor force if you don't have the funding. So we get caught at times. But we try to be as creative as we can with the systems that we have in place, and we do look to other systems. We do interact with the people that are around. When I talk to Dr. Kozlowski, who's the director of Capital Area, all the time she's talking about working with Brad, or she's talking about working with Dr. Clark, or different things. And so we're trying to intertwine the community as much as possible to reach as many people as we can and prevent going to jail, prevent going to the hospital. As a mental health professional, one of the things we don't like to do, really do not like to do, is to have to put somebody in an institution. And so when they come in front, we try all avenues to try to prevent that. Not because of the cost. The cost is one thing that I think the taxpayers ought to look at because they would want to prevent the cost. From a professional standpoint, we don't want to do that to the client. We want to look at all avenues to try to prevent that. We have a program, family preservation, as far as our outpatient children's program, where we will send somebody to the home 2 to 3 times a week to try to prevent the child from being placed out of there. That's the mobile teams that you were talking about. We also have a crisis mobile team, and there's a need for an abundance more of that. And so there are systems that are out there where we're trying to reach the kids and touch the kids. At the same time, it's also to educate the parents. When you were talking about parents bringing kids in, kids who have been labeled they're bad kids in school, you're bad, you're this, you're that, and all of a sudden we get them in there, we look at them, we evaluate going, this is not a bad child. This child's got some bad behavior and it hasn't been diagnosed and it hasn't been treated properly. But I've got kids that we've treated who have gone on to med school, they've gone on to the NFL, they've gone on to various different things where they've been very successful because they were treated early and caught early and things were being able to be done.
Stephen, when you're talking about the walk-in services, are you talking about at the office on Government Street?
We have walk-in services on Government Street for both adult, for both addiction and recovery, for children's behavioral health. The Margaret Dumas Mental Health Center out on Harding also has walk-in services. Gonzales Mental Health has walk-in services. So and we do the walk-in services more than anything to meet the demand of the clients that we have, to prevent the no-show population from what was there, but so that people aren't going, okay, well, we'll give you an appointment 8 weeks down the road, 12 weeks down the road, and if you need something before then, we're sorry, we can't help you.
Does that require parent agreement?
Absolutely. Yeah, they do need a parent to be able to bring them in. Yeah, it can be a challenge for the parents to be able to do that. We give work excuses to the parents. We try to accommodate as far as to meet their needs with hours and to do things as much as we can to accommodate them with, like I said, the limited funds that we have, but yeah.
I just want to say very briefly, and file this under my previous category of being in a place in life where I can say what I really think. But I want to speak from my experience as serving as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Citizens with Developmental Disabilities and serving as the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Health and Hospitals. Mr. Aguilar and the people who work with him are hard-working people who do tremendous things in very difficult circumstances. And he will stand before you with his last breath and talk about the work that they attempt to do and the difference they attempt to make. And it is all authentic, it is genuine, and it is true. The other side of this coin, ladies and gentlemen, is that the health care delivery system for the working poor and the indigent in our community has been pillaged to such a degree that people are getting by with smoke, mirrors, and duct tape. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to be able to say that without in any way demeaning the hard-working people who are being told over and over and over again, do more with less. And ladies and gentlemen, there is a point where there is no more that can be done. And the healthcare delivery system of this state, just like the higher education system of this state, has been decimated. And we need to recognize that. And as we prepare to look to the future of this state, leadership, and those who will lead at various levels, we need to make certain that these questions are asked and that we give voice to say that this matters. This matters because you're talking about people and you're talking about lives. And so I felt compelled to share that perspective.
Dr. Clark, you mentioned that you've been working on a blueprint with Reverend Jensen. I was curious as to what the proposals were for inpatient services.
So part of the blueprint, which I think after our last meeting is this afternoon. So we should have put everything together, and then they'll turn it over, I suppose, to Reverend Jensen and Baton Rouge Foundation. I don't know if there's any further steps after that, but then I'm sure it'll be presented to the Metro Council, to the public in general, for comment or concern. But essentially, what we tried to create when we brought all these minds together was something that would be all-encompassing, meaning that we would have every little thing that we thought was crucial to having a system that was safe and that provided the type of care that we're talking about. So we looked at it from a complete perspective, meaning that some people might just need to be in what's called a sobering unit, right? They're intoxicated, they just need to sober up, they're good to go, then we can connect them to outpatient services. On the other end of that spectrum, maybe somebody is like so acutely psychotic they need to have an inpatient treatment and evaluation and treatment. So that piece as well. So we've divided it up so that there's multiple areas that can be covered. And actually, believe it or not, we've gone so far as to even talk about what's called long-term acute psychiatric care, which is really something you haven't heard since the 80s when they deinstitutionalized the mental health system, meaning they took those folks that had the worst psychiatric issues that were in hospitals for 6 months, a year, long periods of time, and they said, we're done, go out into the community, and that's the folks you kind of see that are lingering in our community and that are in and out of short-term beds. So that's even been talked about that to take it to that level. Now, what happens with all this? Certainly we pass on the blueprint and say this is what we think is the gold standard and the best thing for the community, and wait and see what the leadership decides.
What will happen next is that there will be what might be described as a CEO level review of the plan as it is, and Dr. Clark will actually look at it as a participant, but also as a CEO level, as the coroner of our community. So the coroner's office, the district attorney's office, the CEOs of the major healthcare delivery systems are in the communities, where the emergency rooms are, others who provide services. The question will be, is there anything that we missed here? Is there anything that we should do a little bit differently? And so there is kind of a broad review of the work. And then, as Dr. Clark made reference, there is a conversation that takes place with the Metropolitan Council, with the mayor. There is a conversation that takes place with members of the legislative delegation and the congressional delegation and others around. Here's what we have. And we are, in fact, maximizing the dollars we have. But here are the components of what the experts in our community would say is a comprehensive approach to meeting the needs of people with mental illness. How can we garner those resources? And it is an ongoing conversation that has to take place with our community more largely.
I have to say something because this is a concern of mine. The fact that this room is so empty is a sign to me of people not being educated and understanding in our community. Hopefully this is your final component of this plan, is that we as a community have to buy in and be educated to give y'all and fight for the funding and the sources that you need. Every person has been touched. We hear it, Race for the Cure. Every person's been touched by someone with breast cancer. Every person that I know has been touched by mental health, whether it's been in our families, friends, people we work with, maybe ourselves. And there has to be a super initiative, in my opinion, for the community to buy into this and support this. And just like the ALS, let's pour the bucket of water on us, for lack of a better example, something along those lines, so that we all say, yes, I really want to see our community change. We have a huge mental health problem. How will we do that?
Well, part of it becomes this community conversation. We've begun that conversation with a series of guest speakers to come in and talk to our community. The foundation has sponsored 2 of those. The next one is in a week or 2. But there are these conversations where people who, so the first one was Leon Evans, who directs the facility in San Antonio. The last speaker was actually a journalist who was working with the Washington Post, the New York Post, left his job to investigate mental illness because his son was diagnosed with mental illness. And so there are speakers each month. Once we have the plan, we're going to seek to create ways to have a robust community conversation. The only thing that I would say about this subject matter is that there's still, and I think that Mr. Aguilar made reference to it in some way, there's still a real stigma attached. I can tell you that I had bypass surgery, but I might not tell you that I had to go get my prescription filled for my bipolar. I'll tell you that my family member got diagnosed with cancer and pray for them, but I may not tell you that my child was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so there's still just a stigma attached with being transparent about what is an illness. Not one that people ask for or by their behavior end up with. It's an illness, just like those other things. And so that's a critical part of the conversation that has to happen in our community.
I'll be quick. There is no health without mental health. And I'm a great clinician, and I do media projects to raise awareness. But the truth is that we really, as a community, across the nation, in this community in Baton Rouge and all over the country, need to be having conversations about mental health. We need to do better media. We need to do better messaging. Breast cancer awareness works because it's pink, it's fun, there are ribbons, there are events. There's better messaging. It's savvy and it's sophisticated. It just is. There is no health without mental health, and we need to start telling people, is our community mentally healthy?
I think I'm being asked to wrap up, so.
I can ask that question.
Okay. I want to really thank our panel. We really have a very engaged panel, obviously giving us your time today. Enjoyed it very much. And the expertise of the I'd like to thank all of you for being here and remind you that Leaders with Vision is about informing our community on issues as vital as this one and about going forth from here with the message. I agree with these speakers that there is still a stigma attached, and the only way we get over that is to talk about it. And I urge you to do so. Thank you so much for being here today.